Once again, the sounds of workmen are echoing in the lofty chambers of Iowa's historic Old Capitol. For the people of Iowa, this building represents many things. A symbol of our pioneer roots, our great heritage, the beginnings of our statehood, the cornerstone of the University of Iowa. As America's bicentennial neared, work began on the restoration of this historic landmark to a living museum. The project officially started in July 1970 when Mrs. Susan Hancher was appointed by University President Willard Boyd to chair a national committee of prominent people interested in preserving Iowa's heritage. Dr. Margaret Keyes was appointed Director of Research for Old Capitol restoration and immediately began the extensive planning necessary for such a project. The reconstruction began with the stripping of the building to its bare walls. As the floor, plaster, and woodworking were removed, Dr. Keyes and her researchers studied the underlying structure for clues about the original design. Often during these first months, Old Capitol looked more like a site of demolition than reconstruction. Another phase of the reconstruction effort was also underway. The raising of the funds needed to complete the restoration. Meetings led by members of the executive committee were held throughout the state.
For that purpose,
the public response was tremendous. Of the final budget of $1,600,000, over 50%, $850,000 was raised through a private gifts campaign.
For churches and schools and business streets and plots for residences. With much of the money.
In addition, Mrs. Abigail Van Allen visited schools throughout the state and explained the restoration to the children. Many classes sponsored fundraising projects, but the most significant benefits were educational. The story of Old Capitol provided a concrete focus for their study of the early history of their state. The story of Old Capitol begins in the earliest days of Iowa's history, when it was still a territory. Although most of the area still remained wilderness, the 3 districts along the Mississippi which were settled sent delegates to the First Territorial Congress in Burlington. Almost immediately, these legislators took up the issue of establishing a permanent site for the territorial capital. Since it would be a great honor to have the capital in their town, local interests fought one another for the privilege. Over 27 sites were nominated, but the legislators could not agree. Finally, Colonel Thomas Cox, a Jackson County farmer, moved that the capital be located on unoccupied public land. The motion failed, but it was later revived by Stephen Hempstead in the Senate. This time the motion passed. It stated that the capital was to be located at the most eligible point in the present-day limits of Johnson County. It was later added that this point be called Iowa City. The legislators then appointed 3 of their members to serve as commissioners to locate a suitable site for the new capital. One of these men, Chauncey Swan, was to become the single most important figure in the early history of the Old Capitol. From the start, he was the leader in the efforts to provide Iowans with a capital they could be proud of for many generations. Riding north along the Iowa River, the commissioners began surveying the land. On May 4th, 1839, they made their choice and drove a stake to mark the future location of Iowa City. That the project didn't founder at the outset was due almost entirely to Chauncey Swan. He went to work at once, opening the limestone quarries north of the site, while directing Colonel Cox and 2 other surveyors in platting and mapping Iowa City. With this work completed in August of 1839, Swan conducted an auction, selling lots to raise money for the construction of the building. With the money from this sale, and with funds provided by the United States and Territorial Congress, the work was begun. A solicitation for bids was sent out, and the most promising were the plans of the architect John Ragu. In November of 1839, Swan awarded Ragu the contracts for his plans and the construction. On July 4th, 1840, the cornerstone was laid in a ceremony presided over by Chauncey Swan. This must have been a proud day for the settlers of Iowa. Ragu worked for only 9 more days on the project before leaving. Swan took over the job of hiring and supervising the workmen, keeping them supplied with materials, and securing funds. Swan worked for 7 more years on the project, but was later removed because of some animosity in the legislature. Several other individuals were involved with the completion of Old Capitol, but none showed the dedication which characterized Chauncey Swan. Old Capitol has seen many of the most important events in Iowa's history take place within its walls. The government first moved in on December 5th, 1842, with the convening of the first Legislative Assembly, and immediately began the difficult preparations for Iowa's statehood. It took 4 years and 2 conventions to produce a constitution that would meet the approval of Iowa's voters. Old Capitol was now the official state capital. 6 months later, Ansel Briggs took his oath of office as the first state governor. Much of the work of these early legislators survives in the fundamental laws of Iowa. Within 10 years, the legislature would move to Des Moines following the westward development of the state. In December of 1857, Old Capitol was given to the newly formed university as its first building, housing such departments as the university libraries, chapel, president's office, and law school classroom. Between 1921 and 1924, Old Capitol underwent extensive renovations. Many of the old wooden beams were replaced by steel, and the foundation which had settled was repaired. In addition, the west portico, which had been originally planned but not built, was added, and the gold sheathing was placed on the cupola. Old Capitol was finally completed in the way the founders had envisaged. Since the 1920s renovation, Old Capitol has housed many of the university's administrative offices. This early history of Old Capitol was extremely important in the restoration process. Dr. Margaret Keyes led a team of university students in studying all the available historical material relating to Old Capitol.
As we began the research project, we discovered we were piecing together a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. It required much detective work. This took us not only to repositories here in Iowa City, but we went to Des Moines, we went to Washington, D.C., we studied at the Library of Congress, at the National Archives, and it was at the latter place that we found the proverbial gold mine. We found information on items which were purchased for the building. We found information on the construction, and this included such things as quilt pens, spittoons, huge beams for the construction of the building. We found that we were obtaining so much information on Old Capitol that we had to program it. We went to the key sort method, in which each item about anything in the building is on a separate card, and in that way we can have quick and easy retrieval of information that we know about a specific room or about a specific aspect of the project, such as floor treatments or drapery treatments.
The investigation carried the researchers to the Illinois state capitol, which John Ragu had designed 10 years before the Iowa Capitol. In 1967, the Illinois Capitol had undergone restoration under the direction of the architectural firm of Ferry and Henderson. In light of this experience, they were chosen as the architects for the Old Capitol restoration project.
It's actually creating a pocket around the window. But we did find this in a number of other cases.
It's the craftsmanship. That's the whole thing. To get this actual spiral, is difficult today, and I guess it was standard procedure back in those days. They could bend that.
Using a series of drawings made from projections based on the research, a set of blueprints was laid out. The rebuilding process was now ready to begin. Many of the workers employed in the construction were local craftsmen. Old Capitol provided a unique opportunity for these artisans to demonstrate their skill in techniques seldom used in modern construction. The highest compliment to their workmanship is the finished building itself. This pride in workmanship of local craftsmen is also evident in the work of the Norman Shantz Company of the Amana colonies. As the work on Old Capitol progressed, Mr. Shantz began work on replications of some original furniture from Old Capitol. He was commissioned to produce 26 chairs and desks, the large speaker's desk, and the judge's bench.
The way I feel about making these particular chairs is something very special to us, because we feel that this is really a one-time affair in Iowa, and once in a lifetime, really. And the way we do it here in the Manus, of course, is very common to how these chairs were built by hand with mortise and tenon construction, and really the idea behind it is they were made so they would last, and I think this has proven itself very well in the old chair itself. And as far as building furniture, this is the way it is still done here, and hopefully will be for many more years.
Work continued rapidly on the project. All the individual efforts were finally coming together. The results of over 5 years of planning and hard work were at last being realized. To preserve the 19th century atmosphere of the building, special design features were used to camouflage the newly installed air conditioning system and elevator. Special hidden lighting was installed, and even the electrical outlets were hidden behind special wooden inserts. As many of the original construction features as possible were retained. New plaster was applied to the walls. Beaded ceilings and oak floors were installed. A love of their craft is evident in the time and care these men put in on the project. The high quality of workmanship is apparent throughout Old Capitol. As the construction neared completion, preparations were made for the installation of the furniture. Under the direction of Margaret Keyes, students prepared plans for the furnishings of each room in accordance with evidence uncovered by their historical research. The furnishing of Old Capitol was greatly aided through the generosity of many people throughout the country. Over 300 pieces of furniture were donated. Because of these donations, the historical authenticity of the restoration was greatly facilitated. Many individuals and organized groups also generously donated considerable amounts of time and effort to Old Capitol. These volunteer actions greatly aided the restoration process. The authenticity of the restoration of Old Capitol was maintained in even the smallest details. To provide a visual presentation of the total history of the building, individual rooms were restored to different periods. Such items as books and papers, quill pens, and wood-burning stoves were placed to enhance the historical atmosphere. These details were carefully arranged to give the offices the appearance of the way Old Capitol would have looked in use in the various stages of its history. With the final arrangements completed, the building was ready for its bicentennial dedication. On July 3, 1976, Governor Robert Ray presented the building to the people of Iowa. Over 10,000 people toured Old Capitol during this weekend, and University President Willard Boyd personally welcomed visitors after the ceremony. Old Capitol is now open to the public 7 days a week. Although visitors are allowed to wonder about the building, tours are available. Tours of Old Capitol begin with a view of its central hall and unusual reverse spiral staircase. To the left of the staircase is a reception area furnished with 19th century antiques. Visitors may relax here, view a plaque listing major donors to the restoration project, and examine books containing the names of others who participated in the effort to restore Old Capitol. The first room on the tour is the office of the President of the University of Iowa. It is one of two rooms restored to represent the 1920s period, when Old Capitol housed administrative offices and classrooms. All but one of the university's 16 presidents served in this room. Across the hall is the office of the governor, restored to represent the 1840 to 1850 period. The governor shared this office with his secretary, and so two working areas have been established. The large double desk would allow the governor to dictate letters. The furnishings of the auditor's office down the hall are similar. As he worked at his stand-up desk, the auditor kept the accounts of the territory, signed warrants, and maintained lists of all the accounts. The treasurer, in his office across the central hall, actually handled the territorial monies and presented a financial report annually to the Legislative Assembly. Citizens of the mid-19th century came to this office to pay their taxes and probably were no more eager to do so than we are today. One of the first acts of the statesman who created the territory of Iowa was to establish and fund a library. The library was planned for use by all people, not just legislators. The books were diverse in subject matter and included works on Indians, theology, law, and religion. Across the hall is a room in which many important legal decisions have been made, the Supreme Court chamber. Historically, this room has served as the location for both the Supreme Court of Iowa and a United States District Court. Upstairs in Old Capitol, there hangs a magnificent chandelier composed of over 750 prisms and weighing 650 pounds. It illuminates a room which once served as the Senate chamber, but which is restored to look as it did in the 1920s, when events such as public lectures and university concerts were held here. The House Chamber, the other large room on the second floor of Old Capitol, looks as it did when membership in the House of Representatives totaled 26. To one side of the House chamber stands one of the original 26 desks on which the reproductions were based. The tour ends with a return to the first floor by the central staircase. This unusual feature has become a symbol of the classic beauty of Iowa's first capital. Through the restoration of Old Capitol, Iowans have been given a landmark embodying many of the most important periods in their state's history, a symbol of their pioneer roots, of their earliest days as a state, and of their excellent university. Old Capitol is now a living symbol of their proud heritage.